May 15, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Nakamura sat alone in a cramped radio intercept station on the outskirts of Tokyo, his hands trembling as he decoded the latest Imperial Navy transmission. What he read made his blood freeze. Operation MI, the attack on Midway. Launch date, June 4th. Complete fleet composition, carrier positions, attack vectors, everything. But that wasn't what terrified him. What terrified him was the second document on his desk, a personal letter from his younger brother, Kenji, a radar operator aboard the carrier Akagi. The letter was 3 weeks old, written in careful, coded language that only Takeshi would understand. Brother, I fear we are sailing toward our graves. The Americans are not blind. I have seen things, heard things. Our commanders are drunk on victory, but the enemy is watching. They know our language better than we think. Please, if you love me, if you love our family, find a way to stop this madness. Takeshi had tried to ignore it, tried to dismiss it as his brother's nervousness, but now, sitting with the operational plans in front of him, Kenji's words haunted him. His brother was right. The Americans weren't blind, and Takeshi knew exactly why. For the past 8 months, Takeshi had been part of a secret naval intelligence unit monitoring American radio traffic. His English was flawless, learned during 3 years at University of California before the war. And in those 8 months, he'd noticed something that terrified him, something his superiors refused to believe. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Americans were reading Japanese naval codes. It started small, American ship movements that seemed too perfectly timed, patrols that appeared exactly where Japanese submarines were operating, supply convoys that changed routes hours before Japanese raiders arrived. At first, Takeshi thought it was coincidence. Then, he thought it was luck. But by March 1942, the pattern was undeniable. The Americans were decrypting JN-25, the Imperial Navy's primary operational code. Takeshi had written 3 reports to Naval Intelligence Headquarters, 3 detailed analyses showing the statistical impossibility of American luck, 3 urgent warnings that operational security was compromised. All 3 reports had been dismissed. The third had earned him a formal reprimand for defeatist thinking and a warning that further panic-mongering would result in disciplinary action. But now, holding the Midway operation plan, Takeshi knew he was out of time. If this plan was transmitted using JN-25, and if the Americans were reading it, the entire carrier fleet would sail into a trap. His brother would die, thousands of men would die, and Japan's strategic position in the Pacific would be destroyed. He had to do something. But what? Going through official channels, had failed. His superiors were convinced JN-25 was unbreakable. They believed their own cryptographers, who insisted the code was mathematically secure. They dismissed American code-breaking capability as impossible. Takeshi knew better. He'd studied at Berkeley alongside some of America's brightest mathematics students. He'd seen their analytical capabilities, their computing resources, their obsessive approach to problem-solving. If anyone could break JN-25, it was the Americans, and they had. That night, Takeshi made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would warn the Americans directly not to betray his country, but to save it. If the Midway operation succeeded through stealth and surprise, Japan might negotiate a favorable peace. But if it sailed into a trap because Japanese leadership refused to believe their codes were compromised, the war would turn into a grinding, catastrophic defeat. Takeshi had access to something almost no one else in Japan possessed, a shortwave radio capable of reaching Hawaii and a frequency used by American military intelligence. He'd discovered it months ago while monitoring transmissions and had kept it secret, not knowing why. Now he knew. May 18th, 1942, 2:47 a.m. Takeshi sat in the darkened radio room, alone on the night shift. His hand hovered over the transmit button. What he was about to do was treason. If caught, he would be executed. His family would be disgraced. His brother's career would be destroyed. But if he did nothing, his brother would likely die. in 3 weeks. He pressed the button. American intelligence. American intelligence. This is a Japanese naval officer with urgent information. I repeat, this is a Japanese naval officer with urgent information. Your codes are compromised. We are reading your traffic, but you are also reading ours. JN-25 is broken. You know about Midway. This is not a trick. This is a warning. We are sailing into your trap, and our commanders do not believe the danger. Respond on this frequency at Sejok 300 hours if you receive this message. He released the button, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. For 3 minutes, there was only static. Then, a voice. Clear, calm, American-accented English. Japanese station. This is Pacific Fleet Intelligence, Hawaii. We read you. Authentication required. Provide verifiable information to confirm you are who you claim to be. Takeshi's mind raced. What could he provide that would prove he was genuine without giving away information that would help the Americans if this was somehow a trap against him? Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, 4 carriers. Launch date June 4th, diversionary attack Aleutians, main target Midway, Fleet Commander Admiral Nagumo, operation name MI. I cannot provide more without betraying operational details, but you already know this. Your code breakers have read our transmissions. I am warning you that our commanders do not believe you have this capability. They are sailing into your trap with absolute confidence. Thousands will die unnecessarily. Respond if you are willing to discuss terms. Silence. Then, Japanese station, stand by. 5 minutes passed. Takeshi's hands were slick with sweat. Then the voice returned. Different now. Deeper. More authority. This is Commander Joseph Rochefort, U.S. Navy Combat Intelligence. I lead the code-breaking unit at Pearl Harbor. What you've said is partially accurate. I need to know your intention. Why are you contacting us? Takeshi took a breath. My brother serves on the Akagi. He has written to me in code, warning that your intelligence is better than our commanders believe. I am a signals intelligence officer. I have tracked American movements for 8 months. The pattern is clear. You are reading our codes. I have reported this to my superiors 3 times. They refuse to believe it. Now I have seen the operational plan for Midway. If that plan proceeds as designed, and if you are waiting, our carrier fleet will be destroyed. I am trying to prevent a massacre, not to betray my country, but to force a negotiated peace before this war destroys us both. Another pause. You're proposing we use this information to ambush your fleet, then your leadership will sue for peace. No, Takeshi said. I am proposing you send a message back, a message that proves you know. Force our commanders to abort or modify the operation. Show them you are ready. They may listen, if the warning comes from you, not from me. And why would we do that? Rochefort's voice was skeptical. Why would we give up the advantage of surprise? Because, Takeshi said carefully, if you destroy our carrier fleet at Midway, Japan will fight to the last man. National honor will demand it. The war will last years. Millions will die. But if you demonstrate you know the plan, if you show strength without delivering a crushing defeat, our more rational leaders may argue for negotiation. You will save American lives, and you will save Japanese lives, including my brother's. Silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then, Japanese station, I cannot make promises, but I will relay your message to higher authority. Can you maintain this communication channel? I have night duty every 3rd night, Takeshi said. I can transmit at 0300 hours on those nights, but there is risk. If I am discovered, this ends. Understood. In next transmission window, May 21st, 3 days. We'll be listening. Rochefort out. The radio went silent. Takeshi sat in the darkness, shaking. He'd just committed an act that, if discovered, would result in his execution and his family's destruction. But he'd also potentially saved his brother's life and thousands of others. Now he had to wait. May 21st, 0300 hours. Takeshi was back at the radio, alone again. He transmitted the recognition signal. Within seconds, Rochefort responded. Japanese station, this is Rochefort. I've discussed your proposal with Admiral Nimitz, commander of Pacific Fleet. He has questions. I will answer what I can without compromising operational security beyond what you already know. A new voice came on, older, measured, carrying undeniable authority. This is Admiral Chester Nimitz. I'm told you're a Japanese intelligence officer attempting to warn us about Midway while simultaneously trying to prevent the battle. That's an interesting position. Admiral, Takeshi said carefully, I'm attempting to save lives on both sides and force a rational reassessment of this war before it becomes an endless slaughter. Noble sentiment, Nimitz said. Here's my problem. Everything you've told us we already knew. Your warning confirmed our intelligence, but it didn't give us new information. So I have to ask, what makes you think we should tip our hand and warn your command that we're ready? Takeshi had prepared for this. Because, Admiral, you are about to make the same mistake our commanders are making. You believe you have an overwhelming advantage. You believe the trap is perfect. You believe Japanese doctrine is rigid and predictable. You may be right, but what if you're wrong about even one assumption? What if our fleet adapts in ways you don't expect? What if the battle doesn't go perfectly according to your plan? We're prepared for contingencies, Nimitz said. Are you prepared to lose carriers? Takeshi asked. Because our pilots are the best in the world. If they get one strike through your defenses, they will sink your ships. And right now, you have how many operational carriers in the Pacific? 3? 4? We have 6. The mathematics favor us if the battle becomes a slugging match rather than a perfect ambush. Silence. Takeshi pressed on. I'm giving you a chance to win without fighting. Send a message. Demonstrate you know the plan. Force us to abort or heavily modify the operation. You achieve strategic victory without risking your carriers. Why gamble when you can win through intimidation? Because, Nimitz said slowly, if I show my hand now, you'll change your codes, you'll fix your security, and we'll lose our intelligence advantage for the rest of the war. That advantage is worth more than avoiding one battle. Takeshi felt desperation rising. Admiral, with respect, you are thinking like Japan's commanders, overconfident, assuming your advantage is permanent. But codes can be broken again. Intelligence can be rebuilt. Lost carriers cannot be replaced quickly. I am offering you a chance to shorten this war by years. Why are you hesitating? Another pause. Then Nimitz said something that surprised Takeshi. How do I know this isn't an elaborate deception? How do I know you're not trying to make us reveal our intelligence capabilities so Japan can feed us false information? It was a fair question. Takeshi thought carefully. Admiral, I will give you something I should not. Proof of my sincerity. On May 27th, 6 days from now, our submarine, I-123, will be positioned at coordinates 23-45 N 160-60-12 W. It is part of the picket line meant to detect your carriers leaving Pearl Harbor. If you send aircraft to that position, you will find it, sink it, or force it to surface. Then you will know I am genuine. The radio was silent for so long, Takeshi thought the connection had been lost. Then Nimitz spoke, his voice different now. Thoughtful. You just gave me operational intelligence that will kill Japanese sailors, your countrymen. I gave you information about one submarine to prove I am trying to save thousands, Takeshi said quietly. I-123's crew is 19 men. The Midway operation will put over 10,000 Japanese sailors and airmen at risk. I am making a terrible calculation, Admiral. I hope you never have to make one like it. May 27th, Nimitz said. We'll verify. If you're telling the truth, we'll consider your proposal. If you're not, this conversation ends. Agreed? Agreed. One more thing, Nimitz said. Why are you really doing this, the truth? Takeshi closed his eyes. My brother is aboard the Akagi. He is 22 years old. He plays violin. He wants to be a music teacher after the war. He writes to me in code, begging me to stop this operation because he knows something is wrong. I am doing this because I cannot bear to receive a telegram telling me he died in a battle that should never have been fought. For a long moment there was only static. Then Nimitz said, very quietly, I have a son in the Navy. I understand. May 27th. We'll talk again after that. The transmission ended. May 27th came. Takeshi waited for news about iPhone 23. It arrived late that evening, an emergency bulletin to all stations. Submarine I-123 failed to report scheduled transmission, presumed lost in operational area, cause unknown. Takeshi felt sick. He'd just killed 19 men. Men with families, men with brothers. But he'd also proven to the Americans that he was genuine. The question now was whether they would believe him enough to act on his warning. May 28th. 0300 hours. Takeshi transmitted his recognition signal. Rochefort answered immediately. Japanese station. Admiral Nimitz wants to speak with you. Nimitz's voice came through. You were right about the submarine. We found it exactly where you said. We forced it to surface, and it scuttled itself. 19 men died. I want you to know that. I know, Admiral, Takeshi said, his voice hollow. I will carry those deaths for the rest of my life. Then we understand each other, Nimitz said. Here's what I've decided. I'm not going to warn your command directly. That would compromise our intelligence source beyond recovery. But I am going to do something unusual. On June 1st, 3 days before your planned attack, we're going to conduct a very visible air patrol from Midway, long-range reconnaissance flights at the extreme limit of their range, in the exact direction your fleet will be approaching from. Flights so obvious, so aggressive, that your scouts will definitely spot them. Your commanders will have to know we're looking for something specific in that direction. That's your warning. If they're smart, they'll realize we know. If they abort or significantly modify the operation, you've succeeded. If they don't, then at least you tried. Takeshi felt a mixture of relief and despair. That may not be enough to convince them. It's all I can offer without losing our intelligence advantage, Nimitz said. I'm gambling with American lives too. If your fleet adapts their approach because of those patrols and we lose our surprise, more of my men will die. This is my compromise. Take it or leave it. Takeshi thought of his brother, thought of the 19 submarine crew members he'd condemned, thought of all the men about to sail into battle. I accept, Admiral. Thank you. It's more than I had any right to ask for. One final thing, Nimitz said. After this battle, whatever happens, don't contact us again. This channel is burned. If you're discovered, you'll be executed, and I can't protect you. Disappear. Destroy your radio equipment. Forget this conversation ever happened. Understood? Understood, Admiral. Good luck, Nimitz said. I hope your brother survives. I hope your son does too. The transmission ended. Takeshi sat in the darkness, wondering if he'd done enough. In 6 days he would know. But there was one more thing he had to do. Something he hadn't told the Americans, something that might make the difference between his brother surviving or dying. He had to warn Kenji directly. May 29th. Takeshi used his intelligence position to send a routine equipment check message to the Akagi. Buried in the technical jargon was a coded warning only Kenji would understand. Test pattern Delta 7 indicates unusual atmospheric interference from eastern sectors. Recommend extreme caution during operations in those parameters. In their private code, it meant the Americans know you're coming from the west. They will be waiting to the east of Midway. Stay alert on June 4th. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it is. He had no way to know if Kenji received it, no way to know if his brother would understand, no way to know if it would make any difference. All he could do now was wait. June 1st. As Nimitz had promised, American PBY Catalina flying boats launched from Midway in an aggressive, extended search pattern. They flew to the extreme northwest, the exact direction the Japanese fleet would be approaching from. One of them was spotted by a Japanese submarine on picket duty. The submarine reported, "Enemy aircraft conducting intensive search pattern to northwest of Midway. Unusual activity. Recommend caution." Takeshi saw the report. His heart leapt. This was it. This was the warning. Surely now the commanders would realize the Americans were expecting them. Surely now they would abort or modify the plan. But the response from headquarters was dismissive. Enemy search flights are routine defensive patrol, no indication of specific intelligence. Operation MI proceeds as scheduled. Takeshi felt his hope die. They weren't listening, even with the Americans practically waving a flag saying, "We know you're coming." Japanese command refused to believe their codes were compromised. June 3rd, the carrier fleet sailed from its staging area. 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, over 250 aircraft, the most powerful naval striking force in the world, sailing directly toward the trap that Takeshi had tried desperately to help them avoid. That night, Takeshi sat at his radio station, staring at the equipment. He'd failed. He'd betrayed his country, condemned 19 submariners to death, warned the enemy, and it had all been for nothing. His brother was still sailing toward disaster, and there was nothing more he could do. Or was there? One final gamble, one last, desperate attempt. He could transmit one more warning. Not to the Americans, to the fleet directly. A false message disguised as coming from headquarters, ordering the operation to abort due to compromised intelligence. But if he did that, and if it was traced back to him, he wouldn't just be executed for treason. His family would be destroyed. His brother's career would end in disgrace. Every relative would be marked as traitors. Could he do it? Should he do it? June 4th. 0400 hours. Takeshi sat at the radio, his hand on the transmit key. In 2 hours, the Akagi would launch its first strike wave against Midway. In 6 hours, if everything he believed was true, American dive bombers would fall out of the sky and turn his brother's ship into a burning coffin. His hand trembled on the key. Takeshi's finger lifted from the transmit key. He couldn't do it. Sending a false abort order would be discovered within minutes. The operation would continue anyway, but he would be arrested. And when they tortured him, because they would torture him, he would break. He would reveal everything: the contact with Nimitz, the submarine location, the secret radio frequency. And then, not only would he die, but any chance of his warning making a difference would die with him. Instead, he did something else, something smaller, but perhaps just as dangerous. He modified the morning intelligence brief that would be transmitted to the fleet. In the section about expected enemy activity, he added one line: American search patterns suggest possible advanced knowledge of fleet approach vector. Recommend heightened alert status and flexible response to unexpected enemy carrier presence. It wasn't much. It would probably be ignored like everything else, but it was on the record. If disaster struck, someone might remember that the warning had been there. He transmitted the brief at 0445 hours. Then he sat back and waited for the end of the world. Aboard the Akagi, 0530 hours, Kenji Nakamura stood at his radar station as the first wave of 108 aircraft launched into the pre-dawn darkness: Zeros, dive bombers, and torpedo planes, all heading toward Midway, 240 miles to the southeast. Kenji had received his brother's coded message. He understood what it meant. The Americans knew they were coming. But what could he do? He was a junior radar operator. His warnings would be dismissed as nervousness, and even if someone listened, the operation was already in motion. All he could do was watch his screens and pray his brother was wrong. 0600 hours. The strike wave reached Midway and began their attack. Radio reports crackled back to the Akagi. Attacking enemy installations, anti-aircraft fire moderate, some enemy fighters engaging. Admiral Nagumo, commanding the carrier force, listened to the reports with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding as planned. The Americans were reacting defensively, exactly as predicted. Then, at 0705 hours, a message that changed everything. Enemy torpedo planes, approaching from southeast. Approximately 40 aircraft. Nagumo frowned. Southeast. That was the direction of Midway. But these weren't fighters from the island. These were carrier-based aircraft, which meant enemy carriers. He turned to his intelligence officer. Where are the American carriers supposed to be? Pearl Harbor, sir, at least 2 days away. But even as the officer spoke, the reality was undeniable. American carrier planes were attacking, which meant American carriers were here, now, waiting. exactly as that odd intelligence brief had suggested this morning, the brief that Nagumo had dismissed as paranoid speculation. It was 7:10 hours. The American torpedo bombers pressed their attack with suicidal courage, slow, obsolete Douglas Devastators flying straight and level, perfect targets for Japanese Zeros. The fighter screen tore into them mercilessly. One after another, the American planes were shot down, exploding into the sea or cartwheeling across the waves in flames. Not a single torpedo hit, not one. Nagumo allowed himself a moment of relief. The Americans were brave but ineffective. Their attack had failed. But then his air officer reported a problem. "Admiral, the strike wave is returning from Midway. They need to land immediately. But we still have the reserve aircraft on deck, armed with torpedoes for anti-ship operations. If we land the Midway strike now, we'll have to move all the reserve aircraft below deck, then bring them back up later." Nagumo made a decision that would haunt Japanese naval analysis for decades. Land the Midway strike immediately, move the reserve planes below, we'll rearm them with bombs for a second strike on Midway, then reconfigure if we need to attack enemy carriers later. It was a reasonable decision based on the information available. The American torpedo attack had been destroyed. There was no immediate carrier threat. The returning strike wave needed to land before they ran out of fuel. But it meant that for the next 90 minutes, the Japanese carriers would be at their most vulnerable. Crowded flight decks, aircraft being moved and rearmed, bombs and torpedoes exposed, fuel lines running, everything that could catch fire or explode out in the open. Kenji, watching from his radar station, felt ice form in his stomach. This was it. This was the moment his brother had warned about. The Americans had just sacrificed their torpedo bombers. But why? What was the point of a failed attack? Unless it wasn't meant to succeed. Unless it was meant to do exactly what it had done. Draw the Japanese fighters down to sea level, disrupt the carrier operations, create chaos and distraction. Kenji grabbed his phone to the bridge. "Sir, I recommend we maintain high combat air patrol. The torpedo attack may have been a diversion." The officer on the other end was dismissive. "All enemy aircraft have been shot down or driven off. Return to monitoring." 10:20 hours. Kenji's radar screen was clear. No contacts. The sky was empty. The carriers were recovering aircraft, moving planes, rearming ordnance, controlled chaos across all 4 flight decks. Then, without warning, without appearing on radar because they'd come in so high and so fast, American dive bombers fell out of the sun. Kenji saw them through the window before his radar could track them. Dark shapes against the bright sky, screaming down at incredible angles, Douglas Dauntless dive bombers from the carriers Enterprise and Yorktown. He grabbed the alarm and screamed into it, "Enemy dive bombers! Directly above! All ships take evasive action!" But it was too late. Much too late. The first bomb hit the Akagi at 10:22 hours. It smashed through the flight deck just behind the main elevator, detonating in the upper hangar. The hangar was packed with aircraft being rearmed, fuel tanks full, bombs and torpedoes stacked everywhere. The explosion was catastrophic. Kenji was thrown against his console as the entire ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. Secondary explosions roared through the lower decks. He could smell smoke, fuel, burning metal. Another bomb hit. Then another. The Akagi's flight deck became an inferno. Through the smoke and chaos, Kenji saw the Kaga, 2 miles away, also burning. Multiple bomb hits. Her deck erupted in a series of massive explosions as the stacked ordnance cooked off. The Soryu, further out, was also hit. 3 bombs in rapid succession. She disappeared behind a wall of black smoke and orange flame. In less than 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers were burning wrecks. Kenji stumbled through the listing, smoke-filled corridors of the Akagi, helping wounded men, fighting fires that couldn't be fought. The ship was dying. Everyone knew it. The order to abandon ship came at 10:46 hours. As Kenji climbed over the side and dropped into the oil-slicked water, he looked back at the carrier that had been his home for 2 years. The Akagi was a floating funeral pyre. Hundreds of men were still trapped inside, burning alive or drowning as compartments flooded. His brother had been right about everything. The Americans had known. They'd been waiting, and Japanese command had sailed the fleet into a perfect trap while dismissing every warning. Tokyo, Naval Intelligence Headquarters, 1400 hours. Takeshi received the first reports from Midway. His hands went numb as he read them. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, struck by enemy dive bombers, heavy fires, ships being abandoned. Hiryu, still operational, but under attack. His brother's ship. His brother was on the Akagi. Was he alive? Was he in the water? Was he already dead? Takeshi wanted to scream. He wanted to smash his radio, his desk, everything. He'd tried. God, how he'd tried. He'd betrayed his country, killed 19 submariners, warned the Americans, warned his own command, sent a coded message to his brother, and it had all been for nothing. No, not nothing. His brother might still be alive. The Akagi's crew would be picked up by destroyers. There would be survivors. There had to be. He grabbed the phone and called the communications officer. I need casualty lists from the Akagi as soon as they're available. My brother is aboard her? Everyone's brother is aboard something, the officer said tiredly. You'll get the lists when everyone else does. June 5th. The casualty reports began filtering in. The Akagi, 221 dead. Kaga, 811 dead. Soryu, 711 dead. Hiryu, attacked later in the day. 515 dead. Over 2,200 men dead. 4 carriers sunk. Japan's strategic naval advantage gone in one day. Takeshi scanned the survivor lists desperately. Akagi survivors, 150 men, names listed alphabetically. He found the N section, running his finger down the page. Nakahara, Nakamoto, Nakamura K. His brother was alive. Takeshi slumped in his chair, sobbing with relief. Kenji had survived. At least that part of his nightmare had ended well. But the larger nightmare was just beginning. June 6th. The survivors from the carrier force began arriving back at Japanese ports. They were immediately quarantined. No contact with family, no communication with anyone outside the Navy. The official story was being crafted. Takeshi used his intelligence position to get a message to Kenji. I know you survived. I cannot see you yet, but know that I am grateful you are alive. When you are released, destroy any record of our correspondence. Trust no one. We will speak when it is safe. He never received a response. He didn't know if the message had reached his brother. June 10th. The official casualty report was released. It acknowledged the loss of all 4 carriers, but significantly understated the loss of aircraft and pilots. It described the battle as a tactical setback, but claimed heavy damage had been inflicted on American forces. In reality, America had lost 1 carrier, the Yorktown, and about 150 aircraft. Japan had lost 4 carriers, over 280 aircraft, and most critically, over 3,500 experienced aircrew and sailors. The exchange ratio was catastrophic, but the public would never know. The surviving aircrew were forbidden from discussing what happened. The lost carriers remained on the Navy's official roster for months. The propaganda machine proclaimed Midway as a strategic success that had eliminated American carrier threat in the Pacific. Takeshi watched this systematic deception with growing horror. They were lying, not just to the public, but to themselves. The Navy's leadership refused to acknowledge the scale of the defeat, which meant they couldn't learn from it. They couldn't fix the problems that had caused it. The broken codes, the overconfidence, the rigid tactical doctrine, the dismissal of intelligence warnings, all of it would continue because admitting the mistakes would require admitting the defeat. June 18th. Takeshi finally received permission to visit his brother. Kenji had been released from quarantine, but was still under orders not to discuss the battle. They met in a small cafe in Tokyo, 2 brothers who hadn't seen each other in 6 months. Kenji looked 10 years older. His hands shook when he lifted his teacup. He had burns on his arms and face, barely healed. They talked about nothing for the first 10 minutes, family, weather, safe topics. Then, when Takeshi was certain no one was listening, he leaned close and whispered, "Did you receive my warning?" Kenji nodded, fractionally. "I understood it. I tried to warn them. They didn't listen." "I tried too," Takeshi said quietly. "I did things Things I can never tell you about. Things that still give me nightmares. And it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Kenji looked at his brother, really looked at him, and seemed to understand something. You went beyond your reports, didn't you? You did something unauthorized. Takeshi said nothing, but his expression was answer enough. Was it worth it? Kenji asked. Did it accomplish anything? You're alive, Takeshi said. That's the only thing that matters to me. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Kenji said, very softly, 376 men from my carrier died. I knew most of them. They died because our commanders were too arrogant to believe the Americans could surprise us. And now, those same commanders are lying about what happened, which means it will happen again. I know, Takeshi said. Can this war be won? Kenji asked. Takeshi thought about the conversation with Nimitz, about the submarine crew he'd condemned, about all the warnings that had been ignored. No, he said finally, not anymore. We had a chance for the first 6 months. That chance ended at Midway. Now we're fighting a war of attrition against an enemy with industrial resources we cannot match. Every month that passes, the ratio gets worse. In 2 years, maybe 3, the Americans will be landing on the home islands, and millions will die, defending territory we cannot hold. Then why are we still fighting? Because no one in authority is willing to say what I just said, Takeshi replied. Speaking the truth about our strategic situation is considered defeatism. Officers who question the war's direction are removed or worse. So we continue fighting a war we cannot win because the alternative is admitting we were wrong. And admitting we were wrong would mean thousands died for a mistake. The leadership cannot face that. Kenji was quiet for a long time. Then, what do we do? Survive, Takeshi said. Don't volunteer for suicide missions. Don't believe the propaganda. When the end comes, and it will come, surrender rather than dying for honor. Live to rebuild. That's all we can do now. They parted that day, knowing they might not see each other again. Kenji would be reassigned to another carrier once he recovered. Takeshi would continue his intelligence work, knowing every report he wrote would be filtered through the lens of political acceptability rather than truth. August 1942. The Americans launched their offensive at Guadalcanal. Japan committed its remaining carriers to a series of desperate battles attempting to hold the island. Each battle depleted the irreplaceable pool of experienced pilots. Takeshi tracked the losses, watching his predictions come true with grim inevitability. Every engagement proved the same pattern. Japan might achieve tactical victories, but the strategic mathematics were inexorable. America replaced losses. Japan could not. November 1942. Kenji's new carrier, the Unyo, was damaged in battle near Guadalcanal. Kenji survived again, but 27 of his shipmates didn't. He wrote to Takeshi, I am beginning to think I am cursed to survive, while better men die around me. Takeshi wrote back, You are not cursed. You are witness. Someone must survive to tell the truth about what happened, carry their memory, honor them by living. January 1943. Takeshi's intelligence unit intercepted American communications discussing their production capabilities. The numbers were staggering. In 1942, America had produced over 47,000 military aircraft. Japan had produced fewer than 9,000. The gap was widening. Takeshi included these numbers in his intelligence brief, along with a careful assessment. Enemy industrial capacity continues to exceed initial estimates. Current pilot attrition rates are unsustainable given replacement training pipeline constraints. His superior called him into his office. Your reports are becoming too pessimistic, Lieutenant Commander. The tone suggests defeatism. The tone suggests mathematics, sir, Takeshi replied. Numbers don't have morale. They simply exist. Numbers can be interpreted in ways that support fighting spirit or undermine it, his superior said coldly. I suggest you find more encouraging interpretations. Dismissed. Takeshi left, knowing his days in intelligence were numbered. Speaking truth, even carefully hedged truth, was becoming impossible. April 18th, 1943, news reached Tokyo that Admiral Yamamoto had been killed when American fighters intercepted his aircraft over the Solomon Islands. The Americans had known his exact flight plan, his timing, his route. They'd read the codes again, just like Midway. Takeshi felt sick. Yamamoto had been one of the few senior officers who understood the strategic reality, who knew America's industrial capacity, who had tried to warn against extended war, and he'd been killed by the same intelligence failure that had destroyed the carrier fleet at Midway. Nothing had been learned. Nothing had changed. That night, Takeshi made a decision. He destroyed his secret radio, smashed it into pieces, and scattered them in Tokyo Bay. His channel to the Americans was gone anyway, but even the risk of discovery was too great now. He'd tried to change history. He'd failed, and all he could do now was survive, and hope his brother survived, too. May 1943. Takeshi was reassigned from intelligence to administrative duties, a polite way of removing him from any position where his pessimistic assessments could influence policy. He accepted the demotion without protest. Kenji was promoted to radar officer aboard the carrier Taiho, one of the new carriers being built to replace the losses at Midway. They exchanged letters when they could, carefully avoiding anything that might be flagged by sensors. The war ground on. Island by island, the Americans pushed closer to Japan. Each battle followed the same pattern. Japanese forces fought with suicidal courage, inflicted casualties, and were eventually overwhelmed by superior numbers and resources. June 1944, exactly 2 years after Midway, the Battle of Philippine Sea, the Taiho, Kenji's ship, was hit by a submarine torpedo. Poor damage control led to gasoline vapor buildup. The ship exploded in a massive fireball. 1,050 men died. Kenji Nakamura was among them. The telegram reached Takeshi 3 days later. He read it alone in his small Tokyo apartment, the paper shaking in his hands. His brother, who had survived the Akagi, who had survived the Junyo, who had witnessed the beginning of Japan's defeat and understood its inevitability, dead at age 24, killed in a battle that had already been lost 2 years ago at Midway. Takeshi walked to the window and looked out at Tokyo. The city was still mostly intact, though American bombers would change that soon enough. He thought about everything that had happened, the warnings he'd given, the submarine crew he'd sacrificed, the secret communications with Nimitz, the intelligence reports that had been dismissed, his brother's desperate letters. All of it had been for nothing. Kenji was dead, Japan was losing, and the leadership still refused to acknowledge reality. August 1945. Takeshi stood in the ruins of Tokyo, watching as Emperor Hirohito's radio broadcast announced surrender. Atomic bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union had declared war. The home islands faced invasion. Finally, after millions of deaths, someone had found the courage to speak the truth. The war was lost, and continuing, it would mean national extinction. Takeshi was 38 years old. He'd survived the war, but he'd lost his brother, his career, and his faith in the system he'd served. In the chaos of the occupation that followed, Takeshi's wartime activities were never discovered. The secret radio conversations with Nimitz, the submarine location, all of it stayed hidden. In the vast documentation of Japan's defeat, his small act of treason was invisible. 1952. 7 years after the war ended, Takeshi received an unexpected letter. It was postmarked from Hawaii, and it contained only a single newspaper clipping and a handwritten note. The clipping was an obituary for Admiral Chester Nimitz, who had died of natural causes. The note read, "Mr. Nakamura, Admiral Nimitz asked me to send you this if he passed before you. He wanted you to know he never forgot your courage. In May 1942, he believed you were a man trying to save lives on both sides. He regretted that circumstances prevented the outcome you hoped for. He said to tell you that your brother's death was not in vain, because you proved that even in war, there are men on both sides who value human life over national pride. He hoped you survived. Commander Joseph Rochefort, USN. Retezvich. Takeshi sat in his small room, holding the note, crying for the first time since learning of Kenji's death, not because Nimitz had remembered him, but because someone, anyone, acknowledged that he'd tried, he'd failed. The warnings had been ignored, the disaster had happened, his brother had died, but someone knew, someone remembered. And in the vast, impersonal machinery of war and death, perhaps that was the only vindication possible. The truth about his secret communications died with Nimitz, Rochefort, and Takeshi himself. History would record the Battle of Midway as an American intelligence triumph, which it was. History would never know that a Japanese intelligence officer had tried desperately to prevent the battle entirely, sacrificing his honor and his peace of mind in a failed attempt to save lives on both sides. Some warnings are never heard, some sacrifices are never recognized, and some men die knowing they were right but unable to change anything. Takeshi Nakamura carried that burden until his death in 1967, taking the full story to his grave. But in the quiet moments before sleep, he would sometimes imagine a different timeline, a timeline where his warnings had been heeded, where codes had been changed, where the Midway operation had been cancelled or modified, where his brother Kenji had survived the war, gone home, become a music teacher, married, had children. In that timeline, thousands lived who had died. In that timeline, the war ended sooner, with less horror, less destruction. In that timeline, speaking truth didn't require betraying your country because your country valued truth more than pride. But that timeline existed only in his imagination. In reality, the warnings had been ignored, the disaster had happened, and history had moved forward over the bodies of men like his brother who deserved better. That was the real tragedy of Midway from the Japanese side. Not the loss of ships or the death of pilots, but the fact that it was all avoidable. Someone had seen it coming. Someone had tried to stop it, and the system had crushed him for daring to speak the truth. Some lessons, it seems, can only be learned through catastrophe, and by then it's always too late. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.